Tragic situations in life often help us rearrange our priorities and serve as a reminder of what is most important. Weeks into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, however, it does not appear that the left is spending any time in self-reflection. Be it John Kerry's stated fear that the Russian invasion would hinder climate change goals, or CBS News ringing the alarm that transgender acceptance in Ukraine is not widespread. The left insists on retreating to the battles it knows best, even as life and death issues play out around us. One might think an outbreak of war would provide some helpful, if not sobering, perspective that words are not, in fact, violence. Violence is violence. But if war does not inspire self-reflection, will anything? Joining me now to discuss this is David Closson. He's the director of the Center for Biblical Worldview here at FRC. David, welcome back to the program.
Hey, great to be with you, Joseph.
Now, I'm going to get to that, but before I do, we were together in Greensboro, North Carolina today, a great pastors event there. Tell us what happened and what the Center for Biblical Worldview is doing to serve pastors all around the country.
Yeah, it's great to see you. We were just together a couple of hours ago, Joseph. It's interesting. People watch the news and people can get really upset and down if you watch the legacy or mainstream media, but there's a lot of really great things to report. Last week, I was in Guatemala when we did our Worldview conversation talking about how the president was declaring that nation a pro-life capital for Latin America. This week, we're here in Greensboro, North Carolina, where we had a pastors event just down the street. About 100 pastors joined us. They heard from Tony Perkins, FRC president. They heard from General Boykin. You and I were on a panel discussing a worldview and challenges facing the church. But it was just a really encouraging time to be in a room with people who are really taking their responsibilities as the under shepherds of the church seriously. And it was just a good opportunity to remind pastors and to remind the folks that were there that things such as preaching and discipleship and counseling, these things are essential, no matter what any government tells you. So just an opportunity, Joseph, to encourage pastors. We're going to be doing more of these events around the country. You can find out about everything we're doing if we're coming to a city near you at frc.org/worldview. But we're going to be rolling out more resources to come alongside pastors as well as Christian parents to make sure that we talk about worldview every Friday, to make sure that a truly biblical worldview is being inculcated and passed down to the next generation.
That's exactly right. And the reason why the Center for Biblical Worldview exists and the reason why the event that we did with the pastors together today exists is because we want to help people have the resources physically and intellectually to be able to turn on the news, to read an article, to have a conversation, to hear a conversation, and be able to filter the information that they're getting through a lens of a biblical worldview. One of the great, weaknesses in the church, one of the great challenges is that there are a lot of people that we like who have really good intentions. And when we hear what they say, we know they're sincere and they're earnest, and we tend to be persuaded, not by the strength of their argument, but by the goodness of their intention or the sincerity of their belief. Is that a challenge?
Well, I think it is a challenge, Joseph. I think unfortunately, even within evangelicalism, there's kind of a celebrity culture. And it's, whatever your favorite pastor, your favorite ministry leader says on Twitter or Instagram or some other social media, you kind of want to believe that and go along with that. But unfortunately, that kind of mindset is why statistics like that you and I talk about on this show, that although, 81% of evangelicals who attend church think they have a biblical worldview, when you actually poll them for beliefs and lifestyle, it's only 21%. And I think there's probably a lot of factors behind that. But number one is that we are no longer passing down a biblical worldview. Again, we use that term all the time. This is, in fact, the worldview conversation. But a worldview is simply the lens through which you see the world. A worldview consists of those basic fundamental beliefs about what is true. Is there such a thing as objective truth? Who or what determines what is real, what is right, what is wrong? And as Christians, we believe, Joseph, all those answers are found in Scripture. So that's what, you and I and others on the FRC staff are trying to encourage and remind pastors today here in Greensboro, North Carolina. But that's what we need to be doing constantly. And that's what Christian parents need to be doing, is making sure that we're focusing on all the issues that we deal with through the lens of God's word, because at the end of the day, that's the standard that we need to hold up everything to.
And in the same way that pressure reveals our character, moments of crisis will prove what it is that we really believe. And this Russian invasion of Ukraine is, I think, helping us see what people in America, what our political leadership really believes about some important things. And I'm going to run through this list. And I know you've seen these. I've written this this weekend, and I think it's going to, if it's not up, it will be soon at frc.org/worldview. But I want to run down a list of things that happened within hours and days of the Russian invasion into Ukraine. And these are anecdotes, but I think when we put them together, it actually means something. Only hours after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the head of British intelligence, so, not the United States, but a Western country, very similar values, probably even a little to the left of us culturally, he took to Twitter. And again, we're hours after this invasion. And here's what he said. He said, with the tragedy and destruction unfolding so distressingly in Ukraine, we should remember the values and hard-won freedoms that distinguish us from Putin, none more than LGBT plus rights. That to me is a really interesting observation. War is breaking out in Europe for the first time in 80 years, close to that. And he wants to talk about the importance of LGBT plus rights. Curious. Well, not to be outdone on this side of the pond, we had some of our own identity politics taking place, because President Biden's State of the Union took place a couple days after that, where he lamented the, quote, onslaught of, quote, anti-transgender laws. And he was referring specifically to Texas and their belief down there that it can be child abuse to chemically or surgically castrate a child. Vice President Kamala Harris 2 days later made very similar statements. Again, we're now 5 days or so into this war. We have the head of British intelligence, the president of the United States, the vice president, and then we had HHS Secretary Javier Becerra basically make similar statements attacking the state of Texas for their decisions. So big windup to this question. Why is it that when you're seeing an invasion, you're seeing war break out, it could be a time where we just come together in a unique way and celebrate our shared humanity and our opposition to clear evil? Why is it that identity politics continue to be waged in the Western world?
Yeah, and another example you could give, Joseph, is the bill passed in my home state of Florida that just simply made sure that gender ideology was not taught to children kindergarten through third grade. And you would think that Florida passed the most mean, oppressive law anywhere in the world, which is simply not true at all. And I think behind all of these examples, and you and I could probably give many other examples, is obviously, ideas have consequences, and underneath this hard turn back to identity politics is the worldview of many on the left, Joseph. I watch the news, I see these images coming out of Ukraine. They're tragic. Watching mothers pregnant mothers being evacuated out of hospitals, watching children having to go through the ravages of war. This is objective evil that's unfolding before us in Ukraine. And instead of being able to unite around that, you have leftist politicians using up airspace rather than shining a light and putting pressure on Russia to go, again, to the identity politics. And I think the reason, again, behind that is it shows this is their worldview. When you reject absolute truth, you reject God, what do you have? You have this autonomous perspective that guides everything that you do, and abortion and gender identity seem to be the things that the left is going to continue to talk about time and time again, regardless of what's going on. In the face of real, objective horrifying evil that we should all be able to focus on right now, the left doesn't want to take their eye off the prize of their objectives, which is continuing to move the ball on this more leftist woke agenda. And that is revealing, Joseph. I think this is sad that we're having to talk about this, but it is revealing from where many now are coming from.
In some sense, it feels to me like you have a house fire, but you go onto the roof to try to patch a leak that you discovered. And in terms of its priorities, it's like, this might be an issue, but I also think what we're seeing in Ukraine right now is putting our first world problems into perspective, because really we do have first world problems. And it has become very fashionable in the United States to be a victim. And do you think in any sense, the presence, the visibility of people who really are victims, because they've had missiles launched into their homes, their families have been separated, their loved ones have been killed by a maniacal, whatever terms you want to use for Putin right now, he is doing terrible things to people. These are real victims. Is there any sense in which we in the West, who have wanted to make ourselves victims, might have our victim status feel threatened by the presence of people who undeniably are victims?
Well, I think so, Joseph. So I think that unfortunately is what more and more people in this country, that, whether it's critical race theory or things like that try to see the world in these categories of oppressors and oppressed and victims and whatnot. I think I hope, and I would imagine there are many people around the country that are seeing these images on their screen and realizing, oh my, this is what, we haven't had a war like this in 80 years, but seeing the scenes of just horrifying violence being perpetrated against innocent people that didn't ask for this at all. I would hope, Joseph, that there are millions of Americans and millions of those in the West that they are doing some self-reflection and maybe for the first time in a while realizing the things that they have in their lives to be grateful for. But one other point I'll make, Joseph, is, the Christian worldview actually gives us the categories to even think through everything we're seeing. Most other worldviews have denied that there's absolute truth, that there is any way we can discern right from wrong. And, I think that is actually the sign of a residual Christian worldview, that we have instincts that can respond to the images that we see on our TV screen. We can say objectively that what Vladimir Putin and his cronies are doing in Russia, invading Ukraine, that is evil. Well, where does that moral language come from? It comes from the Christian worldview. And I think, again, that's just important to underscore. All these stories that we deal with, ultimately, at the base of all of them is worldview.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because if you can't logically use the term evil if you don't believe in ultimate truth in some sense. Now, we've talked a little bit about identity politics. There's another area in which the left has kind of maintained their priorities, and one that got a lot of attention that I think is worth giving a little bit more attention. And we're talking at the very outbreak of this war, John Kerry, former senator and Secretary of State, currently serves as President Biden's special presidential envoy for climate. He expressed his hope in an interview that Russia, despite their invasion of Ukraine, would, quote, stay on track with their commitments to combating climate change. And then
diplomacy will win, but massive emissions consequences to the war. But equally importantly, you're going to lose people's focus. You're going to lose certainly big country attention, because they will be diverted. And I think it could have a damaging impact. I hope President Putin will help us to stay on track with respect to what we need to do for the climate.
There you have it. We need to stay on track in the midst of our invasions to make sure that we're accomplishing our environmental goals. The Atlantic in the last week ran an article lamenting the potential environmental damage that would happen from a nuclear war should it break out. What's going on here, David, where in the prospect of real human just tragedy, we're concerned about making sure that the invading countries stay on track with our climate goals? Well,
my first thought, Joseph, watching John Kerry say that was elections have consequences. And obviously, former Secretary Kerry is laser focused on the climate issue. And comments like that at one level are just incredibly naive. I think he really believes that the climate issue is the number one issue, that Russia needs to stay on track. I can assure you that's the last thing on Vladimir Putin's mind, making sure they're keeping on track of emissions standards or levels. But again, it does underscore the worldview and the commitment that many on the left have to their global warming climate agenda. And, as Christians, we believe we should have stewardship. We should care for the creation. But at the end of the day, Joseph, we realize that all people are made in God's image and have value and dignity, and care for, global warming protocols should never displace attention from people who are made in God's image. But again, that's a outworking of a worldview that is unmoored from the gospel.
And the biblical worldview does teach us very clearly in Genesis chapter 1 that the creation is made for us, and we are not made for the creation. And I think we see many examples here where that gets inverted. And as you indicated, that is not a license to abuse the environment or to exploit it, but it is, of course, a recognition of the fact that God made the planet, the earth, the resources for the crown of his creation, which is us, for us to rule and subdue and benefit and ultimately give him glory. David, we're out of time. Thank you for your time today so much.
Thank you, Joseph.